Shall I unmute? I will unmute.
Hi.
Thank you so much.
Hiya.
Hi, you happy to start?
Sure. Is it, can you hear me properly, or is there, because when I'm hearing you, there's a slight sort of delay.
Yeah, we can hear you. I'll just introduce you first because not everyone knows who you are. Can you hear me?
Can't hear you.
You can't hear?
Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you.
I can't hear you. Okay, fine.
Do you want to log on again?
Okay, so I guess, is it okay if I start then? Do you want me to wait?
Can I just introduce you? I will just introduce you. 2 minutes.
2 minutes, fine. No problem, I'll wait 2 minutes.
Lovely. I will.
Susan?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
You could just allow me to share screens.
You should be able to share.
Sources. Is that okay? At the moment, you've disabled me being able to share screens.
I've allowed.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
If you go onto your settings.
Yeah. I've allowed
the option to allow participants to share screen.
I had it on one participant. I've now put it on multiple participants. So you try now. And
let me try. Brilliant.
Okay, so I'll just introduce you. Give me 2 minutes, okay?
Sure.
2 minutes. So, okay, so we are delighted that Rebbetzen Yael Hamer is speaking us tonight on Lessons for Our Time. Rebbetzen Hamer is Rebbetzen at Bridge Lane Beis Midrash. Prior to that, she was Rebbetzen for many years at Finchley Federation Shul. After attending SEM in Israel, she spent time there teaching and mentoring in SEMs and gaining certification in crisis intervention as a doula, which she practiced in Israel.
I didn't realize you were talking about me.
She has QTS in secondary education and gained her BA in psychology from Tura University, and she's head of sixth form at Hasmonean Girls. So you can speak now?
Yeah, sure. All good. Okay, fine. I'm not actually head of sixth form anymore. Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. I wanted to, look at a topic with you today that hopefully will take us through a whole bunch of different sources across Torah Shebechsav and Torah Sheba'al Peh. We're going to ask a question and search for answers and hopefully take something practical also home with us. Well, we're already home, but take it further home. Take something that we can take from our learning into our own lives, because as always, whatever sources we look at, every parsha, every week, there are always lessons for our time, things of relevance to us that we can draw on and incorporate into our own daily interactions and our own development in our journey through life. So if it's okay with you, I just wanted to share screen. I wanted to just, again, feel free to just listen or just read and ignore everything I'm saying. The screens are there for those who sort of like to see the sources in writing. It's just gone and disappeared on me. I hope it's not disappeared. Oh no, jokes. Okay, I'm so sorry. Can you just give me a minute? Because for some reason, my screen has shut the wrong one. So let me just, here we go. This is the one I want. Okay. Let's try again. I shall try and share with you again. Now, hopefully you should be seeing on the screen. Can everyone see the sources? Is the size okay? We're going to start here with a Gemara. By the way, just as a disclaimer at the beginning, what we're going to share here are ideas that are not original to me. They are all sourced, as you'll see, from people much greater than myself. So all I'm trying to do is present them as a unified whole, relying a lot on Sichos Musa of Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. But we're going to start off here with a Gemara, and the Gemara discusses the following question, or the following statement actually. It's a Gemara in Maseches Sota, and it says, Reish Lakish Omar. Reish Lakish, one of the sages, one of the Amoraim of the Gemara, he says, Ein Adam over Avera, a person never commits a transgression, Ela imkein nichnas bo ruach shtus. Sorry, it's at the bottom of it sort of reversed itself. Ruach shtus, it should say. So a person sins, a person transgresses, a person will only commit a sin if some kind of spirit of shtus, which is basically some kind of foolishness or momentary insanity, enters into his mind. And we know that's quite a famous, well-known statement, that if a person transgresses, meaning they face a choice in their life, they're confronted with something, they choose the wrong decision, they make a mistake, they sin. Chazal tell us from the Gemara here that that's because a ruach shtus, some kind of spirit of foolishness, entered them. So here's our question, and it's a question that has been quite useful for many people in court. And the question is actually asked by one of the sages called the Akedas Yitzchak, which I think I've brought you down over here. And the Akedas Yitzchak says, don't have it there. The Akedas Yitzchak says as follows. He says, if it is true that a person only sins when they have this moment of them dysfunction of the mind for a moment, momentary insanity, call it what you will. If that's the cause of a person's sin, how can we ever be held responsible? It's not my fault. I had a ruach shtus, a spirit of foolishness that's entered into my mind, caused me to behave the way I did. Once my sanity was restored, I was restored to my former self. How can I ever be held culpable for any sin I commit? And this is a question that bothers the sage called the Akedas Yitzchak. And what I hope to do with you is look at two approaches. The first briefly, and the second hopefully in more depth, because I think it really gives us a great deal to think about and demands of us actually a great deal of honesty and self-awareness in our own actions and in our own lives. So the first answer, which is what the Akedas Yitzchak himself brings, he says that it seems to be that it's an approach that agrees with a Socratean approach that man's thoughts will always lead him in the right way towards truth and justice. And basically, the reason why he says we can be held culpable is because there are three types of people. He says there are those people who are governed almost entirely by their intellect, meaning their passions, their desires, their physical urges have very minimal sway on them. And these are the kind of people that will rarely sin. They are very cerebral and very governed by the processes of intellect. You have at the other end of the spectrum people who are governed by their physicality, by their passion, by their desires, for whom intellectual reasoning plays little role. But then you have the vast majority of us who exist somewhere in the middle. We're pulled in both directions. The intellect demands a certain understanding and a certain standard of ethical and moral behavior that's true to its own intellectual rationale. And yet the whether you want to call it passion, we can call it Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara if you like, we're pulled in another direction that demands physical gratification and immediate pleasure. And that is what he calls free will. Meaning, if we were all entirely governed by intellect, there would be no choice to make. And that tug of war and that constant swaying back and forth, whether to follow that voice of intellect or the voice of passion and immediate gratification, that's what he calls free will. And according to his understanding, therefore, a person can be held culpable, because how he explains what is a ruach shtus, what's a moment of foolishness, it's merely, as he explains, when that particular battle wasn't won by the intellect, but it was won by the part of us that demands gratification and physical pleasure now. So both are valid parts of the human psyche, and therefore we cannot absolve ourselves of responsibility, because according to him, we made a choice to ignore the intellect. We made a choice, and in a way, a cerebral choice, to ignore that, and therefore we're held culpable. But let's see if we can look at another approach that gives us another, perhaps a deeper level of insight into how we function as human beings. And this is an approach brought by the Sichos Mussar. In this week's parasha, actually, this week we have Chokas and Balak. And the Sichos Mussar, he points us to what seems to be an apparent contradiction into who this person Bilam is. So on the one hand, if you look at the pasuk over there, I hope it's clear. Can people see it? Is it better like this? People must nod or shake their heads, otherwise I have no idea. The pasuk tells us, this is what Bilam himself says. He says, if you look in this pasuk, it says, Tomos nafshi mos yesharim, but utehi acharisti komohu. He's saying, he's uttering a sort of a request, a prayer, a hope, that my soul in death should be like the Yesharim, meaning referring to the forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who were called Yesharim. And I want I want my end of days to look like theirs. I want my fate to be like theirs. So on the one hand, we have clear proof that Bilam had intellectual realization and understanding of what was Yashar, what was truth, what was the correct path in life that he should be choosing, to the extent that he offers up a request, I want that for my future. I want to be like them. And yet, glancing across the parasha, but perhaps it's summarized succinctly in Pirkei Avos, where we say, but look at the lifestyle that Bilam led. It says, who are the Talmidim of Bilam Harasha? Who are those who are considered to have inherited the traits, the lifestyle of Bilam? And it explains those who have, over here, Ayin Ra'ah, Ruach Gavoha, Nefesh Rechava. Again, these wicked things, an evil eye, a haughty spirit, a limitless appetite. If you look in the English, those who are the students of Avraham Avinu are the opposite. And those who are the students of Bilam seem to embody every kind of evil lifestyle, again, without going into too many of the different mefarshim in the Torah and explanations of his particular lifestyle. Suffice it to say, it was nothing close to those Yesharim that he wanted to be like. So we see an apparent contradiction. Who and what is Bilam? Is he a person who understands truth and wants to pursue it? Or is he a person who wants to lead the life of a Rasha and end up, as the pasuk says, that they will inherit Gehenna and descend to the nethermost pit? We seem to have a contradiction. Who is Bilam? But the Sichos Mussar afterwards, he said, we don't even have to look at an example quite as extreme as Bilam to find these kind of inherent contradictions closer to home within ourselves, where we seem to embody two things that seem to be pulling and heading in a different direction. And he brings an example. There's a Gemara. This is a Gemara in Shavuos. I'm sorry, but I didn't have time to translate it. But it basically describes a question. It says, I brought you here the Rashi from the Gemara, which discusses somebody who touched an impure animal and then went up to the Beis Hamikdash. We are clearly not allowed to go if you are impure. One of the ways of becoming impure is because you touched an impure animal. And the Gemara discusses, what is going on here? This is a person who he knew he learned the halacha that you can't touch an impure your animal and then go up to the Beis Hamikdash. He knew he touched the animal. And now suddenly he finds himself in the Beis Hamikdash and suddenly realizes, oh, 1 second, what am I doing here? I'm impure. It says, Shalama b'beis Rabbi shehanogea b'tumata. He knows he's tummy. But, and here's the word that we're going to start to see now several times over here highlighted. Lo hisbonein lasum el libo. He didn't sort of stop. And this phrase, lasum el libo, which means to put something into your heart. He didn't take time to make that mental connection between the hand feeling the touch on an impure animal and the mind that knows I can't go to the Beis Hamikdash this way. There's a disconnect. There's a disparity. Again, remember that phrase, lasum el libo, because we're going to find it again. We look, let's go back. This next source over here, this is from the parasha where we're up to the 7th plague. When we come to the 7th plague, the Egyptian people already know whatever Moshe says is going to happen and hard. He says there's going to be a plague of blood. It's going to happen. Beware. And we're up to 7 now, so we know the truth. We know that he's not kidding when he says. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu commands the people, and he says, there's going to be another plague coming, and it's going to be the plague of Barad, the hailstones. And he says, take everything you own and put it in shelter, because nothing is going to remain alive once this hail starts to fall. And then the Pasuk tells us something a bit mind-boggling. It says, those who feared God took all their slaves and all their animals and put them under protection. However, familiar phrase again, the asher lo sam libo al dvar Hashem. Those who did not, again, sam libo, take that time to take what Moshe was saying, to take the intellectual reality and absorb it and connect it to the physical actions and the outcome. Those people left their flock and left their servants out in the field. Now again, this sounds to be mind-boggling. How could they possibly do that? How foolish were they? But it's this concept that we have, this lo sam libo. And this is what the Sichas Musa explains. Simas lev, paying attention, focus. It's more than focus. It's taking the time to connect the intellect, the experiences around us, the messages that are coming in from all around, to absorb them, integrate them, and connect them then to who we become and the decisions that we make. And he explains that as human beings, we are able to function with this kind of disconnect, where we can understand one thing in our intellect and not connect it to our future self, or not connect it to what's therefore needed to happen next. And there are many examples of where we see this. Again, I know that it seems kind of a little bit mundane perhaps, but let's say someone who's even just trying to diet, and open the fridge and pull out something that is distinctly non-dietetic. So again, at this point, I have the brain that knows one thing, the stomach that knows another, and to the extent that there is a sima slave, to the extent to which the intellect has been drawn in to connect to the heart and the emotion and the feeling and the decision making, that's the extent to which I will or will not be able to return that cake to the fridge or help myself to another slice. And he explains this is what we see with Bilam. It wasn't a contradiction that Bilam, did he know the truth or did he not? Does this person know they touched an impure animal or do they not? Is the hail going to hit my animals? Is it not? It will. They know that. However, what's lacking or what's present is this obvious disconnect. Being able to separate between what I know in my head to be the truth and the choices that I make in my life. Now, going back to our original question, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go right back to the beginning of our Gemara. The question was that What does it mean? If a person sins, Chazal tell us they have this ruach shtus. So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz in the Sichos Musa explains, and this is an incredibly deep insight into how we function. He says ruach shtus is not momentary insanity, where for a minute we take leave of our senses. He says the shtus, and by the way, we learn it because the Pasuk says about, we have it here in the Gemara, the Pasuk says about a man's, the Isha Sota, it says, Ki tiste, Isha, this word, tiste, she turns aside, meaning she does something for which she followed after a physical urge, and the consequences were not good. There was a disconnect between what she knew to be morally correct and what she allowed herself to do. That word tiste is the same word as shote, as shtus, and that's where the Gemara learns it. So what is this ruach shtus? And I think this is quite profound. The Sichos Musa says that the ruach shtus, this spirit that goes into a person, is that they are able to convince themselves, or to create, it's really to trick themselves, I guess, that what I'm about to do now is disconnected from who I ultimately and really am as a person. And that makes you able to sin. Let's explain that. It's simple and it's clear that every action a person does has a run-on impact in who they become. So the ruach shtus is me tricking myself into saying, I can do this action. I'm a good person. I can do this action and I will still be a good person after. Meaning I'm creating a disconnect between who I am and kidding myself that this action will not have a long-term impact on who I become. So for example, again, perhaps mundane but true, I think of myself as I'm an honest person. So now what happens if one time I can't think of an example, one time I pretend that a child is the age, that they have to pay the lower rate. It's up until age 10 is this price, and my child just turned 11 and I say they're 10. Somehow I have to, because otherwise I am going to experience dissonance in my head that, one second, I'm an honest person, how did I do that? The way is that I kid myself and trick myself. This ruach shtus, that actually one little trick, one little dishonesty, I'm still an honest person. It's not going to make a difference to who I am. That's the shtus, because it isn't true. Every action, however small, is definitely going to impact the person that I am. And therefore, the consequences are going to be irrevocable. So who got this right? We have an example from Yosef. When it's this, what I brought here is the Bereshis Rabbah, the Medrash Rabbah. It says that Potiphar's wife was tempting Yosef with all kinds of temptations above and beyond, incredibly difficult to resist. And the Medrash tells us that Yosef spoke to Potiphar's wife and said, he says, God has come to appear to my family before and chosen from among us people to be sacrifices to him, to be close to him. What happens if after this God comes and has a look and I'm not fit anymore to be that close to him? Or another opinion, in the house of my father, God would appear regularly at night. What would happen if I'm busy in this sin, and then God will appear and he'll find me in this state of impurity? And even that, those rationales was something that Potiphar's wife could comprehend. What Yosef was doing was what was not a ruach shtus. What he was doing was saying these actions have consequences. And even if we can justify it, and even if you saw in the stars that we have a child together, I'm not going to be the same person after this act than I will if I'm able to resist. So being able to have that perspective and being able to connect every act, however mundane, to the bigger picture that I hold of myself in my intellect, that is going to hold back the Ruach Shtus. And actually the Sichos Musa says, and I haven't seen him write this very often at all, he says, Zohi hashoresh hagodol v'limud hamusa. This is an incredibly deep root in understanding self-development. When you can understand that it is possible to split yourself into disparate sections to exist with a disconnect. But what we're saying here is there's a demand. How are you going to avoid that Ruach Shtus? By simas lev, by taking everything you know that you are or you want to be in your intellect, the intellectual understanding and the cognitive image that I have of who I am and what I want to become. And simas lev means taking every experience around me in the world, every interaction, every decision, and melding it together with the image that I hold in my mind. Because as soon as I disconnect the two, who I want to be in my head and who I actually am in my actions can be completely different. And this is perhaps a lesson for us to sort of think of and be honest with ourselves in our lives, whether every choice that we're making and the decisions that we do are honest and congruent with our intellect, with our seichel, just like Bilam, who knew what was yashar and knew what was right, and yet his actions were entirely contrary to that. In opposition, we want to be like the Talmidim of Avraham Avinu, who exemplify the opposite, that everything that we do, there is no Ruach Shtus, because we're not allowing ourselves to opt out of our own reality, even just for the space of time it takes to do one action. So again, there obviously every parsha, there's so many lessons to learn and so many deep insights, but I just thought this was something that we could sort of think about, and because it is so easy for a person to rationalize things to themselves, to justify anomalies and actions that are, one-offs and out of character, the Ruach Shtus that comes into ourselves. And yet if we build that consistent picture and we don't allow ourselves to believe that actions can happen in isolation and not impact the continuity of who I then am, we really can achieve honest and authentic growth. My philosophy is that Zoom Shiurim that go on for like more than about half an hour, people start to get like a bit zoomed out. But if there are any questions on any of these concepts, I might not know the answers at all. I'm happy to make something up, or maybe I might know. If anyone has any questions at all, I'm just going to stop the sharing for a minute because it makes it difficult for me to see who I'm talking to. But are there any questions at this point on the concept that we discussed? By the way, I didn't mention, I think it's actually important to note that even David HaMelech, who was so incredibly great, we see a momentary example of this kind of disparity, where after this episode with Bathsheba, the prophet Nathan comes to David, and rather than rebuking him outright, he tells him a mashal, he tells him a story that directly parallels, in a very obvious way, directly parallels the perhaps possible transgression that David had committed. And even though the parallel is so clear and the circumstances so much model what David had done and the mistake that he had committed in this case, he couldn't see that connection. He didn't make that connection until Nathan the prophet pointed it out to him. Because even though he was hearing intellectually something and his actions weren't consistent with that, a person does have that tendency. If we're not really having that simas lev, if we're not really focused, then a person is at risk of that ruach shtus moment of separating who I want to be in my intellect and the very detailed actions and choices that I make every day. I just thought I would add that in, that this is a basic human trait that we all have to work with. Any questions at this point? Anybody? Thank you. Anyone have any questions at all?
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you, but I can't see you. Is there a way I can see you?
Yeah, in a minute. Yes, I'll turn the camera.
Oh, are you? No. Is your screen dark? That's fine.
Yeah, sorry, my screen's dark.
Oh, no, that's totally fine. I just thought it wasn't, and I have no idea. I can't see you. No, that's fine. Feel free. Yeah, sorry, I can hear you.
very
Yeah.
interesting. Quick question.
Yeah.
All your examples have been from people who already had such greatness.
Mhm.
We're talking about the everyday person. We all have conflicts and challenges.
Mhm.
And I suppose the greater the person, the greater the challenges. But how can we bring this into everyday life? I mean, it's do you see what I'm trying to say? It's
100%. And I
examples
think,
you've given us
yeah.
are people that we look up to, but they may not have any relevance to people who are living today.
Right. So I think whenever we take examples from Torah, from Chazal, we encounter the identical types of challenges, but the perhaps level and setting is different. So what we do is we understand the conceptual, the idea that a person, so in this case, the idea that a person can make a decision, can kid themselves into thinking that a negative action isn't going to impact them. Their choices may have been incredibly difficult. Ashes Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar. Our choices might be, in our modern lives, difficult for us, but not for them. But the concept, the underlying root of human nature is the same. Meaning, to pause and ask ourselves, is this consistent with the bigger picture of me? Meaning, our circumstances may be different, but the underlying choices are the same. So our Yetzer Tov is probably not as big, and our Yetzer Hara is not as big either, but the humanity is the same. So you in your life can also ask that same question. I'm about to do something, it will be okay. I'm starting to justify something to myself. Catch myself and say, no, this is what a ruach shtus is. I'm kidding myself. I'm not going to be the same person after this, even if it's, so I shut my mouth and I don't snap whatever it was I was going to snap, or eat what I was going to do, or not, I'll just, this time I won't do it, but generally I do. This time I won't be particular about this halacha, this mitzvah. Again, to remind ourselves that, no, this has a knock-on effect. So the choices and the pattern of human behavior is the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that clears up something. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. No, but it's a good point, because our level of choice is not in the same place, but the avoda, the self-development and the self-authenticity that's demanded is the same.
Yes, and it's something to think about all the time. That's the point.
Absolutely. It is a little relentless, because yes, but you know what, sometimes even if you catch yourself after and you think, oh, drat, that was exactly one of those cases where I let myself down and I kidded myself and it wouldn't, but that's fine, because you can then arm yourself for next time and say, okay, I know that now that I know that that's going to impact me. So when I find myself in that circumstance again, now I know different. And we will. Sometimes we'll succeed and sometimes we won't. And that's life and growth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
So I came on eventually.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Anyone else want to, or even something that you heard that maybe something I said that you triggered some kind of something that you read or heard anywhere, anything at all? Anyone? Well, I'm going to just wish everyone hatzlacha in the lifelong battle that we have in trying to maintain consistency between what we know in our heads and what we try to be in every action. We all have days where we get it better and days where not so much, but we wake up the next morning and we try again and remind ourselves that ruach shtus, there's a cure, and the cure is focusing and reminding ourselves every action impacts who I am, impacts those around me, and impacts my path to growth. So hatzlacha to everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. Have a very lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rebbetzen Hamer.
Thank you.
Really thought-provoking analysis of the Ruach Shtus and how we can connect to ourselves and the choices we make in life and the dilemmas we all face in our daily lives. So thank you so much. Next week, Rebbetzen Frieda Kaplan will be speaking to us from Yerushalayim on why Yerushalayim called Shel Zahav. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next Sunday evening. I'm just going to hand over to Naomi Landy, who has an announcement from Riley Close. Naomi.
Yes, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Rebbetzen Hamer, and thank you,
Thank
Susan.
you.
I just want to mention an event that's taking place on Zoom at 8 p.m. on Tuesday this week, 30th of June, with Dr. Sarah Schenker. It's about health, well-being, football, obesity, and fussy eaters. Dr. Schenker is a dietitian and nutritionist. Details from the Raleigh Close Schule office and the events on the usual Raleigh Close Zoom platform. And see you all next week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, Rebbetzen Hamer.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You can see on the chat, there's lots of thanks.
I'm going to have a look at the chat. Thank you.
Okay, wish everyone good night and thank
Thank you.
you everyone again.
Thank you.